Sometimes I feel we are janitors of the Republic. Hi, this is Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, what I mean by that is that it seems like this just kind of barrage of news is continually happening, specifically in this case with regard to the impeachment trial of President Trump. And then we kind of come in at the end of the day and just sort of sweep the floor and kind of deal with some issues. And so this episode of Bill Whittle Now is going to be kind of a grab bag of questions and issues that have arisen during the last couple of days over the weekend and the early days of this week about this trial. And of course, for those who are paying attention to the news over the weekend, the big so-called big breaking news was that former National Security Advisor John Bolton has a book coming out in March, and the manuscript has apparently leaked in some form to somebody who talked to the New York Times. And the New York Times reports that while National Security Advisor John Bolton directly heard President Trump say that he would continue to withhold aid, the military aid that Ukraine so desperately needed, $391 million, in exchange for the investigation of Joe and Hunter Biden. Okay, so all of that, as we record this, there's still no paper manuscript in anybody's hands. The Bolton people have said they didn't leak the manuscript. The Trump administration says, in fact, Donald Trump himself tweeted out and said that just didn't happen. President Trump did not say that to John Bolton, and that he's probably just trying to sell his book. So, Bill, the question, of course, impinges directly upon whether or not the Senate should call witnesses, because this is not a new allegation. This may be considered to be increased credibility to an existing allegation, but the whole charge was that President Trump had abused his power by trading a couple of things for this investigation of the Bidens. And so I guess, Bill, one of the things that I wondered about, just in purely political terms, there are a handful of Republican senators who seem interested in calling witnesses. And if you're Mitch McConnell and you want to hold on to your Senate majority the next time around, why not essentially say, okay, we're going to give these senators at least an opportunity to vote for witnesses so that they can go back to their so-called moderate states and make the case that they tried to conduct a fair trial, even if the vote should fail. What's wrong with doing that, if only to hold on to GOP seats in moderate states where you may not otherwise be able to get a guy?
That's a great question. There's a lot of stuff here to talk about. One of the things I learned when I was trying to manage an improv comedy group, believe it or not, which is really like herding cats.
I see a direct connection with the U.S. Senate here. Go ahead.
I was ostensibly the producer on that show, which meant that I actually had the authority to do things. But again, you're dealing with very talented, very temperamental people. And I learned a lesson in that experience, which most people will find cynical because it is. And what I realized was I would only put things up to a vote if I was sure I was going to win. If I was sure that the vote was going to go my way, then I'd put it up to a vote. If Mitch McConnell is 100% certain that by allowing this vote on witnesses, guys like Mitt Romney, who I retract every decent thing I ever said about that man, if it turns out that he is sure that the witness calling thing will not happen, then put it up to a vote, get it off the table, give them the cover, and give himself the cover, give the whole Senate the cover. If there's any doubt about it whatsoever, then he ought to do what he can to squash it. And the reason I say this is not because I'm afraid of witnesses. The reason I say this is because the entire strategy from the beginning on the part of the Democrats has been to throw these unsubstantiated charges against the wall, eliminate the presumption of innocence, and hope to God that something would come out in terms of just by stretching it out. Can we have something come out? Can we have the president's defense of himself have some kind of irregularities and so on? So in the strict answer to the question that you just asked, if McConnell is sure that the vote to allow witnesses can be tabled, then fine. You want to give Romney and McCaskill some cover? I don't care. But if it turns out that it results in this witness calling, then all you're doing is playing into the strategy of these people who from the beginning have had nothing but dishonorable and power-hungry motives behind this whole thing. And I don't want those people to be rewarded.
Bill, from a Republican perspective, the ideal outcome here, as you've mentioned in a previous episode of Bill Whittle Now, would be a rapid trial with at least the appearance of fairness and a rapid acquittal of the president so he could get on with the business of running the country and getting reelected. There's a risk in this particular case in that a rapid acquittal would not turn the nation's attention away from this if John Bolton's book comes out. I understand it's coming out in the middle of March. And if it comes out and it turns out that there were some substantive things that were at least concerning enough that he should have been called as a witness in an impeachment trial, and then essentially that whole thing blows up again, a new investigation in the House of Representatives, more chatter at the very least in the media, more allegations that the Republicans are running an unfair sort of scam of a process just to protect their fair-haired boy in the White House. Wouldn't it be better, because it was a perfect phone call and because the president has nothing to be concerned about because he's telling the truth, to just give this to the moderate Republicans as well as Democrats and say, go ahead, bring the witnesses?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think that this is to open the doors to exactly the kind of process that is the problem in the first place. I know we talk about this every episode, but let's just go over the main salient points here. It is up to the House of Representatives to bring charge. It is not up to the Senate to investigate this case. It's up to the Senate to adjudicate the case. If the House of Representatives brings charges before all of their evidence is in, then they shouldn't have brought them in that early. So the entire balance of this procedure, the entire protection of the procedure is not that the House of Representatives can get ginned up and pull the president out of office. It's that the House of Representatives can get ginned up, and then the Senate has to decide just how much gin there is in the bottle. And the Senate is not required to add gin to the bottle. That absolutely tilts and prejudices the entire balance of the procedure. So that's number one. And number two, the whole presumption of innocence and so on is out the window. I've talked about that before until I'm blue in the face. I'm not going to
let me just say
that
the Democrats in the House would say we did call these people to come and testify, but they wouldn't come. Either the president forbade them from coming, or in one case, Don McGahn, the president's attorney, has been tied up in a court case for some 9 months in resisting coming to testify. And John Bolton has indicated that if he were subpoenaed, he would come to testify for this. So it's not as if the House did not make any attempt to get them. The House did make a political decision, I think, to say, you know what, if we go to court over every one of these people, including John Bolton, then this thing is going to get strung out over a long period of time. We may or may not win. And I think politically they looked at it in terms of the 2020 election. But I don't think, Bill, your case is correct when it comes to the Senate, because once a case goes to trial anywhere, the ability to gather information that has not previously been unearthed in the discovery process is not challenged by anybody. If new facts come to the surface, you can bring them forth.
Hold on. That's because a trial, a normal criminal trial, is essentially a uniparty. It's up to a group of people. In the impeachment procedures, it is a binary effect. And for your analogy to be correct in terms of comparing it to a regular criminal trial or a civil trial, the correct analogy would be the defense rests, Your Honor, the prosecution rests, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's up to you. They go into the jury deliberation room, and 4 days into deliberation, the prosecution says, hey, wait, we found something else.
I don't think that's exactly accurate, because now the case is being tried, Bill. This is not after all the case has been made, because technically, until the House team arrived at the Senate, no case had been made to the Senate. So now that case is being made. Now the president's defense team is defending it. There will be some question and answer times, and there will be some closing remarks. That's a trial. That's not hey, we're throwing it to the jury after what happened over at the House.
Look,
I know analogies are tricky, and we probably shouldn't get bogged down too far in analogies, since this isn't a purely legal proceeding.
It is not a purely legal proceeding. If it were a purely legal proceeding, we would have had an acquittal a long time ago, because even if what Bolton says is true, it's hearsay evidence. I mean, it's the whole thing is hung on the idea that the founders did not specifically state what the actual grounds for impeachment would be. High crimes and misdemeanors is the definition as I understand it. right? So the question then is, where are the crimes? Where are the misdemeanors? And are they of a magnitude to impeach the president? This is gloves off politics, and it has been for me for a long time. The reason I think that the Republican Senate ought to just chuck it is that if the Democrats want to say, well, this was a partisan decision to throw this out, then the response should be, and it was a partisan decision to bring him in the first place.
Fair enough.
This is the reality of what the Democrats have done to our political system. This is the exact kind of thing. It's a much greater magnitude, but it's very much like Harry Reid deciding that he wanted to do away with 150 years of comity and not comedy, and agreement and decency and respect for the process, because he wanted a cheap vote. And that's what Nancy Pelosi has done here. She wanted some kind of help for her pathetic candidates. And so here we are. If it comes out of the House without a single Republican vote, and then it is chucked out of the Senate by every Republican vote, then I don't see how one of them is partisan and the other one isn't. And there's two more things to say about this. I have a lot of respect. I had a lot of respect for John Bolton. Let me put it to you this way. And let me simply say this. If John Bolton were the man that I thought he was prior to this whole thing, and if John Bolton were the man that he apparently claims to be now, then this thing would not have been a fishing expedition based on a leaked excerpt from an upcoming book. If John Bolton was a man of integrity, then John Bolton should have said during the House proceedings, John Bolton should have stepped up and said, I have evidence that what you're saying is true. That's what he should have done. And for him to suddenly now say, well, if you want to call me, I'm happy to testify. Oh, really? You're happy to testify now, but it wasn't important enough to you so that you didn't do anything about it when there was a chance for you to do something about it without having your hand forced or without trying to sell books.
And that's the Trump administration's position, by the way. Mick Mulvaney, the director of Office of Management and Budget, has basically said that Bolton didn't make a stink about it at the time, although there is allegedly a phone call that he made to Attorney General Bill Barr to talk about things related to President Trump's interactions with foreign leaders that suggest that. Let me ask you a question directly about this.
So hold on. So this just to close this up. So that goes directly to, it doesn't so much go to Bolton's credibility as it goes to motives. And it goes to this idea that, that the Democrats are saying, well, here's a true patriot who's ready to stand up. He's not ready to stand up. He could have stood up when he was supposed to stood up if he felt that this was important enough, and he didn't. And if he didn't do it because he was intimidated, or he didn't do it because he felt this, or he didn't do it for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. If you believe in this country, and we've had this discussion with other witnesses of this kind of thing. If you are a patriot and you believe in this country and you believe some grievous harm has been done to the republic, then nothing gets in front of that. Nothing gets in front of that. Nothing. And clearly, John Bolton, when these impeachment proceedings began, did not think that what he heard was enough of a threat to the republic for him to stand up on a soapbox and say, hold on, no, everything they're saying is true. This was gross abuse of power, and he didn't do it. And so you have to ask yourself now, why all of a sudden is he willing to testify now that a part of the book is leaked, which Bolton claims his team had nothing to do with, and which I don't believe for a split second. But in any event,
should they send the manuscript over to a Senate committee to be read in secret, not publicly, but should they subpoena that manuscript and say, we're going to read this in secret so we can see if there's any relevant information here?
No, because he's writing a book. A book is not testimony. A book isn't testimony. If they're gonna do this, they have to subpoena him, put him under oath, and then have him commit to it that way. I could send a transcript of anything I've written, and to have that be used as evidence about what I actually did, as opposed to a piece of work, even though it's supposedly nonfiction. Nevertheless, anytime you try to put together a narrative story about historical events, I don't know, I've been working on the Cold War for the last 6 months. You have to arrange things in an order that make the story clearer without changing the story. You can't invalidate the facts. You can't invent facts, but you can sometimes weigh things and order things in such a way so that the causality becomes clear.
So let's look at it, Bill, from both sides, though, the advantages and the disadvantages of this situation. Because if they don't call Bolton, and this thing remains a mystery at least until the book comes out, by which time the trial should have been over, if they don't call Bolton, there'll always be that suggestion out there that maybe Bolton had the bombshell. If they do call Bolton, and the Republican senators have an opportunity to cross-examine him in a sense by asking questions, and if the president's defense team has a chance to be able to deal with the substance of his allegations, then they can go back to proving that President Trump did nothing wrong.
Which brings me back to my initial statement, and that is that Mitch McConnell or whoever else is making this decision needs to do it in the function of an attorney. If I thought there were any credible charges here, that this was in fact a serious issue and not a political one, I would not be arguing the way I'm arguing. But since it is a case of people who are basically lying down, claiming they're wounded, bringing medics over so they can pull a hand grenade and kill everybody, since that's what we're dealing with now, then I have to deal with this from a purely political point of view. As far as Bolton's book coming out in March after Donald Trump is acquitted, I don't give any weight to that whatsoever, as if it's going to change any minds at this point, as if anybody's minds are going to be changed by this at this point, and as if anybody's minds are going to be changed even if he testifies now. This thing is either real or it's not. The people who support the president not just because they support the president, but because they can see that this has been such thin gruel from the beginning, and that's why no Republicans voted for it in the House. And there's your evidence right there. So if they want to make this into a political circus, that's what they're doing, and now it has to be dealt with. This is my entire argument in a nutshell right here. If these were legitimate causes for impeachment, where members of both parties saw that this was serious abuse on the part of the president, I would be arguing this impeachment thing as if it was a matter of right and wrong. But since that never happened, since the people involved were known liars, have been contradicted multiple times. And by the way, if we want to talk about past news, Donald Trump's defense team destroyed them on Saturday, absolutely destroyed the entire impeachment argument. So I no longer think of it as a case of right versus wrong that needs to be carefully adjudicated and needs to be weighed. Now I look at it as sheer, raw political coup, and that's how I plan to defend against it. If it was up to me, I would now say, okay, now we understand what's going on. They are using this process, a sacred and tragic process, in order to remove a president who was elected because they don't like him. So if it's going to be a completely democratic articles of impeachment sent to the Senate, then we will deal with it in the Senate as Republicans, not as senators, not as Americans. We're going to deal with it as Republicans because that's how it's being offered to us. And the answer to your question then is, if I'm Mitch McConnell, I want to have a serious look at whether or not this is going to outweigh the benefits of not calling witnesses. And whichever one is the most politically expedient, that's the one I want them to do, because that's what this is. And I'm not proud of this and I'm not happy about this, but this should never have been going on in the first place. And everybody who knows what's happening knows it. And a final thing about this abuse of power thing. This is entirely why the entire process is so dangerous to the Republic. It's so dangerous. If we were to make an accusation against Barack Obama having abused his office, his power in office of the president, and we're not able to really specify why, but we just know that he did. And we sent some articles over to the Senate about it, and then we determined to call witnesses and bring everybody in and talk about transcripts and all the rest of it. Without question, we would be able to find things that we thought were suspicious enough to confirm whatever prejudices we may have had in the beginning. But the exercise of power is the exercise of power. And I don't know that even if what John Bolton says is 100% correct, I don't see a problem with it because I don't see Donald Trump trying to suppress the truth. You know, if he's using leverage and if he's using muscle to get to the truth, that's an entirely different thing in my point of view, which is one thing that gets lost in the beginning of all this. And as all of this goes on, and as his reputation continues to suffer, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden continue to walk around happy as can be. So I
Republicans
think
could call them to testify with a 51 vote majority at any point that they wanted to.
So as I mentioned before, since this is a political maneuver and not a question of legal right and wrong, I would expect that Mitch McConnell, Rudy Giuliani, President Trump, and a lot of other people who know what they're doing should sit down and take a very close look at whether or not witnesses are going to be good or bad for the president's case in terms of acquittal. I don't much care about his reputation because I don't think his reputation is going to be significantly changed by any of this. I don't care about Michael Bolton's book. There's been books coming out about Donald Trump's abuses of power and Donald Trump's illegitimacy. They've been coming out every month since Donald Trump was elected, and before then, as a matter of fact. So the idea of a book coming out doesn't worry me in the slightest. What concerns me is the idea that you cannot. I'm trying to make this a direct legal one-to-one correlation, but the spirit of it is correct. If there's a guy you don't like politically, you should not be able to get a search warrant for that guy's house because you're sure he did something. And then as a result of the search warrant, find a couple things that maybe you could take to court. That's not how it works. And if you decide that is going to be how it works, then you are going to get the consequences of this destruction of the legal protections that every American has, including Donald Trump. You cannot authorize intrusion into people's privacy, into their attorney privilege. You can't go into their records and their phones and all of this stuff. Phishing. And that's what this is. And this fishing expedition has to be smacked in its face, Scotty. This is a fishing expedition. And and because the fishing expedition is so dangerous in the first place, it's so immoral and so dangerous, not just to the impeachment, not just to the president, but to the entire structure of justice in this country. If you can make a charge, get a warrant, and then go fishing until you find something that sticks, that is more dangerous to this country than anything. And that leads me to believe that if I'm stuck with a choice of the president having broken actual laws now that were determined through a fishing expedition, I would rather see them thrown out because I think the fishing expedition is far more dangerous than whatever the charges may be, even if the charges are legitimate, and I don't think they are. And you may not like that, and you may not think that's very nice, but I don't like it either. And nobody particularly liked firebombing Japan or Germany in that matter. Nobody was like, hey, we get to go kill some kids today. That's not how it works. Sometimes you're stuck with these two choices that are miserable, that have been foisted upon you by other forces who have no concern whatsoever about honor, integrity, tradition, none of it. And so now you find yourself in a situation. A completely partisan articles of impeachment were sent by a partisan House to the Senate, and now I expect the partisan Republican Senate to defeat them in whatever manner they think is most expedient. And that's what I expect them to do. And if they don't do that, then we are back in the days of Robespierre and the French Revolution and the ability to point your finger at somebody and say, j'accuse, I accuse you. Defend yourself. Prove you didn't do it. And this is the world that these miserable progressives are leading us into. They also led us into the French Revolution and into the Soviet Revolution, all the rest of it. All the blood that runs on the streets of history, all the rivers of blood that have come from executions in history have come from this exact idea. If you're not guilty, you got nothing to worry about. So what do you care if we go digging through your attic? If you're not guilty, you've got nothing to worry about. That is the end of the rule of law. It's the end of the presumption of innocence. And it's the end of a society where people can sleep at night, not worried about whether or not they're going to be thrown in jail tomorrow because they know that they didn't do anything and they don't have to prove their innocence. Somebody has to prove their guilt and they didn't commit the guilt. And so the burden is on the accuser. And that's what's at stake here. And I am at the point where, like many Americans, I am now seeing exactly what's going on. And to me, to say that the president committed some crimes or some questionable behavior, and therefore we're going to remove him. In the case of this fishing thing, that to me is like writing a parking ticket for a guy who sees a school on fire and decides to get out with his fire extinguisher, put the fire out. That's what it looks like to me. He parked illegally. He saved 250 kids. But he parked illegally, and parking illegally is wrong. That's where we are. That's where they put us. And I don't have any particular moral problem with falling into this last ditch position because I'm not the person who put us in the last ditch.
Well, to quote an old business associate of mine, the cleanliness of theory is no match for the mess of reality. And to
Well said.
paraphrase Charlton Heston and Mitt Romney both, politics is people. And that is what we deal with day after day, 5 days a week on Bill Whittle Now. We do so because of the members at BillWhittle.com who make it possible through their contributions, their membership dollars, and we're grateful to them. These things do not happen in a vacuum, in some sort of pure sanitary laboratory. Politics is worked out day to day by people talking to each other, by people taking action on their convictions and dealing with the fact that we're all broken creatures. If you want to hear more of this kind of conversation, to advance this kind of counter-narrative dialogue, go to BillWhittle.com right now, click that Become a Member link. Join us on our Caribbean cruise, May 15th through the 18th. You'll get a chance to hang out with some people who see the world a little bit the way you do and who I think you're going to have a great time with. Lots of laughter, lots of fun. And of course, it's a Caribbean cruise. So, what more argument do I have to make? Go to BillWhittle.com and click the big boat, and you can join us on that. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.